Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs, and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable ad-free tales of terror. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Disclaimer. Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Specifically, tonight's episode includes scenes of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. Good evening, listeners, and welcome back to Horror Hill. I'm your humble host, Erik Peabody, and tonight we've got a trio of fun little nightmares for you, all wrapped up in a nice little package. We'll be opening with Traditions Aboard the FV Weeping Widow by Ryan Major. Our protagonist is a young man that finds himself in a tough spot. He's just uprooted his life to join a crabbing boat, and now is being told that he doesn't have the necessary experience. Rueing the possibility of returning home broke, he's elated when the captain suddenly changes his mind and invites him aboard. What our hero doesn't know is that his lack of experience has no bearing on what the crew actually wants from him. After that, we have two stories from Shane H. Sellers. The first, Cometh the Rotted Man, details an evening with three boys spending a wonderful summer night in a treehouse as the world begins to burn around them. And the second, House of the Rat King, involves probably the worst hoarding situation I've ever heard of. With such a full plate of ghoulish gastronomy in front of us, I'd say it's time to dig in, wouldn't you? You're listening to the standard edition of this program. If you'd like to help support Horror Hill and also remove these pesky ads, head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. You'll get instant access to hundreds of ad-free stories, and we can scale back some of our less savory means of generating money for the show. By the way, you wouldn't happen to still have all of your organs, would you? And now, from author Ryan Major, I present Traditions Aboard the FV Weeping Widow.
You ever been on a boat before, Lucas?
Asked the burly man on the pier.
Dangerous work. Man's liable to go over the side if he ain't careful.
I ran my hands through my mop of auburn hair. I had sent in an application months before and told the captain I had no experience on the water, but maybe he didn't see that part. It had worried me at that moment that I may be about to lose the job before I even started.
"No, sir," I replied. "I have no experience on a boat. I know how to swim and have spent time at the lakes back home, but nothing like this."
Captain Orange furrowed his brow as he looked me over. It was hard to determine his age. All of his hair had gone gray and his face was lined with deep wrinkles. His body was a stout rack of muscle. He was either in his later years or life on the sea had worn him down. "My business manager must not have looked over your application too well," he said dismissively. "Crabbing on the Bering Sea ain't a game. You young folks watch some damn show on the Discovery Channel and think it's a quick payday. It ain't. Not sure this is going to be for you." I grabbed my duffel bag from the wet concrete and turned to walk back to the hotel. My mind raced between the disappointment of rejection and the panic of having to pay for a plane ticket home. My bank account was nearly drained, and I would have had to use my already taxed credit card. "Hang on," he shouted. "Be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's too damn late for me to find a new deckhand. You're just gonna have to learn to be useful real quick. If you can't keep up, crab ain't gonna be the only thing we dump at the port." The old man turned and walked back onto the deck of his boat before vanishing into the wheelhouse. FV Weeping Widow rocked gently against the pier. I spent the first 2 hours of our trip on the Bering Sea violently dumping my breakfast into the filthy toilet just off the kitchen. Every time I retched, I could hear the other deckhands howl with laughter outside. Captain Orange had told the crew to hit their bunks for a bit of rest before we reached the crabbing grounds, but their laughter and jeers made it clear they had no intention of heeding the advice. It seemed like all my stomach contents had successfully ejected when a pounding sounded against the thin wooden door. "All right, Greenhorn," one of the deckhands shouted. "Time to get off your ass and on your feet. We'll be dropping pots soon, and that herring won't hop in the bait bag. Let's move." I could hear their voices growing quiet and the thuds of heavy boots heading up the steps onto the deck. Wiping my face on my sleeve, I pushed myself onto my feet and walked out the door. The smell of beer and cigarette smoke nearly made my seasick stomach turn again, but I managed to press the urge back down. Pushing the bulkhead door open, I entered the equipment room where the other hands were slipping into their cold weather gear and waders. A big man, who I thought was named Jimmy, shoved a bright orange bodysuit into my hands and smacked me on the shoulder. I looked at it in confusion. It was completely different from the gear the other men were wearing. "What's this?" I asked the man. "It doesn't look like the same gear the rest of you have." "That's an immersion suit, son," he responded with mild annoyance. "Captain told us you never been out to sea before and got no boat experience. Me and all the boys think you'll fall overboard, and this is the only thing likely to save your rookie ass." The other men began to howl laughter again. I began to put on the enormous suit, unsure if it was a joke or not. There was no other gear in the room, so my options were limited. The others began to file out of the bulkhead and onto the deck. After 5 minutes of struggling into the immersion gear, I was finally ready to join them outside. Cutting wind and water slapped my face as soon as I stepped onto the deck. The other hands scurried to crab pots, cinching ropes and checking for holes. Jimmy stood beside an industrial grinder and waved me over. "Grab these bait bags and we'll start lining them up over at the pot launch," he said, gesturing to a pile of mesh sacks filled to the brim with ground fish. "Gotta hurry if you want to keep the job." I grabbed as many of the bait bags as I could and began to clumsily waddle toward the launcher at the side of the ship. The immersion suit was unbelievably bulky and made it difficult to bend my legs to walk. My feet slipped and shuffled as I tried to find purchase on the wet deck boards. I had just finished dropping the first load of bait bags when the boat grew silent. The engines had stopped. There was no more hurried noise from the crew who had been readying the crab pots to launch. An electric sensation of fear jolted through my body in the sudden silence. I turned toward the deck to see all 7 deckhands surrounding me in a semicircle. Just as I was about to speak, I heard the door from the wheelhouse open and slam closed. Looking up, Captain Orange stood against the railing, hands clenched around the frigid metal, a grim look on his face. "It ain't personal, Lucas," he shouted. "We got a tradition here on the Widow. Every 4 or 5 years, me and the boys sacrifice a man to the sea. Keeps the rest of us safe.
Superstitious, maybe, but we ain't lost a man accidentally in 22 years. That suit'll give you a few hours to get right with whatever god you pray to." At first, I thought it was a joke, but a few of the men pulled work knives from their belts as they all walked toward me. Captain Orange had already turned and walked back into the wheelhouse, slamming the door behind him. The engines roared to life, and the boat jolted forward. "Over the side," Jimmy said, "or the boys will have to stab you a few times to inspire you. Suit won't keep you warm if it's all full of holes." "Please!" I screamed at the men as they slowly closed in on me. "Don't do this! Just take me back to the port! I won't tell anyone!" They remained silent and continued forward. The first man was in arm's reach and leaned in to grab me. I swung my fist as hard as I could and connected with the side of his head. He stumbled back, shocked at the unexpected blow. I prepared myself to throw another blow, but the others began to move in faster. While I was distracted by the first man, the others seized the opportunity to tackle me to the railing of the shift. I thrashed violently and hit every man within reach, but it was no good. I felt two of them wrap their arms around my ankles and lift me into the air. My hands clenched around the metal railing, and they tipped me over the side. Grips still in place, I slammed against the hull of the ship and looked up in horror. 7 crazed faces stared down at me, smiling with sadistic glee. One of the men began trying to pry my fingers from the rails, but the sudden surge of adrenaline had increased my strength. No matter how hard he pulled my fingers or slammed his fist down, my grip wouldn't break. Then I saw one of the men vanish. He returned moments later with a hammer. Lifting the hammer above his head, he brought it down on my left hand with a sickening crack. White bolts of pain filled my eyes as I heard the bones crunch from the blow. My left hand spasmed in pain and fell from the railing. The weight of my body strained my right arm as I continued to hold on to the rail. My muscles burned with agony as I watched him lift the hammer a second time. A second wave of pain swept my body as the hammer made contact. My vision went black. The splintered bones of my right hand gave way, and I fell to the churning sea below. My loss of consciousness was momentary. I felt as though I slammed against concrete as my body met with the rough waves below. The unimaginable cold encompassed my body almost instantly, and any hope of drifting away to a peaceful death vanished. I began to struggle against the waves and paddled my arms to turn myself upright. Fresh surges of pain erupted in my hands and shot up my arms as I tried to use them to right myself in the water. The suit had kept me dry, but the bulk made it nearly impossible to control my movements. Finally, I managed to get myself onto my back and floated on top of the choppy sea. White-capped waves lapped and slammed against me, filling my mouth with briny water and making it difficult to breathe. As soon as I passed over the top of a new wave, I would coast down the back and dip below the water before coming back up and gasping for air. I could see the FV Weeping Widow rocking gently on the waves, and the spotlight moved into the distance. A man was standing at the back of the boat, one arm propped on the railing and the other waving merrily in my direction. It looked like he lowered it to blow me a kiss. "Thank you, Greenhorn," he shouted with glee. "If my kids knew what you sacrificed to keep their old man safe, they'd thank you too." "Please," I shouted. I slipped under the water again. "Come back!" Another whitecap swelled over my head, filling my mouth with salty water. "Don't leave me!" A larger wave pushed me a few feet under, sending water into my lungs. I can't! Please!" The lights vanished over the rolling waves, leaving me in the pitch dark. The water began to calm a bit as the wake of the boat settled. My balance returned, and I began to float calmly in the water. Stars burned brightly overhead. I had never been this far away from a city to see them so clearly. They would have been beautiful in any other setting. There, in the Bering Sea, the stars would be the only witnesses to my death.
I drifted for hours. The immersion suit had kept the worst of the cold at bay for a while, but I had eventually started to feel the icy daggers of the frigid water creep into my muscles. I had given up hope on trying to swim. My body ached and it hurt to move. Hopelessness had overtaken me, and I simply waited to die. After letting go of the fear and anxiety, I noticed I felt a bit better. The water didn't seem to be as cold then. My body aches were dissipating. I felt almost comfortable. Hypothermia. Late stage, probably. It's no way to go, but by the time that false warmth starts filling your body, you're almost thankful. I had decided to close my eyes and rest and let the ocean take me when I heard something in the distance. A rumbling sound. A ship's engine. I opened my eyes and scanned the area, and in the distance, I could see a dim light. There was a ship passing to my right. Too far away to see me, too far away to hear me scream. I rested my hands on my chest as tears filled my eyes. My hands landed on top of a hard, round piece of plastic. Confused, I fumbled at it with my bent and broken fingers until I felt a bump on the side. Pushing it in, the night sky filled with obnoxious light. The damn suit had a strobe. I had been out there for hours and never checked the suit for any gear. There was no telling how many ships might have passed close enough to see it, but in my panic, I never checked. Bright flashes of light nearly blinded me as they radiated in the night sky. I shielded my eyes with my crippled hand and turned my head toward the boat passing me by. My mind was foggy, but I thought I could see a spotlight burst to life on the deck. A thin beam of harsh light began to scan the sea all around me. With great effort, I lifted my arms in the air to wave, hoping the reflective material on the sides of the suit would catch their attention as well. After a few moments, the spotlight fell on me, and I had to shield my eyes completely. The light remained on me for what felt like an eternity, until I could hear the deafening roar of the engine of a ship nearby. Waves began to crash violently against me. Once again, I struggled to keep my head above water and breathe. "This is the United States Coast Guard," a resonating voice called from the ship's loudspeaker. "We will dispatch a rescue team to pull you aboard." A few moments later, I was lifted into an inflatable boat. There were a few men and women on board talking into radios as we sped back to the larger shift. The luminous spotlight followed us the entire way. It was like a light from heaven, carrying me back to safe harbors. I started sobbing uncontrollably. A woman sitting next to me grabbed my hand to comfort me. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't bother telling her about my injuries. I was too relieved to be in the sight of another person that the pain was worth the contact. I squeezed her hand back as best as I could with my shattered fingers. We pulled alongside the Coast Guard boat and 4 cables dropped from a crane above. The rescue team started attaching the clasps to the boat, and in moments we were lifting from the choppy sea. Tears flowed freely as we drifted upward to the deck. As we lifted above the side, the crane began to swing us onto the deck before gently lowering us down to it. A swarm of warmly dressed men and women pulled me from the boat and put me on a stretcher. They chattered back and forth about care measures as my mind swam in the joy of my rescue. "Hey there, big guy," one of the men said. "Can you tell me how you ended up in the drink out there? You're a long way from land." "Thrown overboard," I said in a croaky voice. "Crabbing boat, weeping widow. Crew tossed me overboard." The man's expression changed from professionally friendly to concerned. "Stop," the man said suddenly. "Let me talk to the captain before we take this guy inside." The man vanished, and the others stood around me. I was too exhausted to talk, but my fear and confusion returned. They were all looking at me and whispering amongst themselves. A few moments later, the man returned with a lady I hadn't seen. She stood, hands behind her back, staring down at me on the stretcher. Her eyes were stern. "Sir, were you thrown overboard from the FV Weeping Widow?" she asked. I nodded weakly. "Yes." "Take him back and put him over the side," she said to the group standing around me. "We know the tradition, and it isn't our place to interfere." She turned and walked away as my heart jumped into my throat. I tried to sit up, but discovered they had harnessed me to the stretcher. My aching muscles writhed and strained against the straps with the last reserves of energy left in my frail body. "No!" I shouted, my voice suddenly filled with energy and terror. "Please! Why are you doing this?" They ignored me and continued to wheel me toward the railing at the side of the ship. When we reached the side, they moved the stretcher parallel to the metal barrier and turned the stretcher sideways over the top. "Stop!" I heard a voice shout. It was the captain again. I was relieved, thinking she had come to her senses. "What are your orders?" a man asked. "Remove the harness and drop him in without the stretcher," she said flatly. "If anyone discovers the body, we don't want them to find him tethered to a piece of damn Coast Guard equipment." Two of the crew unbuckled the harnesses holding me to the stretcher, and I once more fell into the sea. A crewman had loosened the neck of my immersion suit when they were taking me inside. Unlike the first time, cold water rushed into the immersion suit as I tumbled into the salty waves. The boat engines roared as the Coast Guard ship pushed through the dark of night. Before they left my sight, they cut the lights, leaving me to drift under the starry sky. I've been back in the water for an hour now, and the uncharacteristic warmth has returned to my body. My eyes are heavy, so I'm going to close them for a little bit. Maybe another ship will come by. Probably not, but I need some rest. I'm so sleepy. You've just heard Traditions Aboard the FV Weeping Widow by Ryan Major. Ryan Major is a writer frequently featured on the Dr. Nosleep podcast and Full Body Chills podcast from AudioChuck. He lives in Kentucky with his wife and 2 sons. You can find more of his work through Velux Books at www.veloxbooks.com. And now, from author Shane H. Sellers, I give you Cometh the Rotted Man. The stifling summer night enveloped us as my 2 friends, Rob and Jake, and I huddled in our cherished treehouse. The old wooden planks groaned softly beneath our weight, their weathered surface bearing the marks of countless adventures. A canopy of ancient oaks surrounded us, their rustling leaves whispering secrets in the night breeze. The distant hum of cicadas and the occasional hoot of an owl created a calm harmony that blended seamlessly with our youthful laughter. Inside the small treehouse, a collection of comic books and toys sat in the corner on a shelf, while mattresses and sleeping bags littered the floor. A poster of Stephen King's Pet Sematary hung on the adjacent wall, accompanied by a cutout of Kim Cattrall blowing a kiss. "Hey guys," Rob chuckled, nudging Jake with his elbow. "Did you see Sarah today? She was looking fine." Jake laughed, his face turning a shade of red. "I heard she's easy, man." "Your mom's easy," I teased. Jake shook his head, his unruly red hair falling over his bottle-frame glasses. With a look of defeat, he rolled to his elbows and began to flip through the Hustler magazine that lay on the treehouse floor. The soft glow of the flashlight illuminated the pages, casting a surreal glow on Jake's face. He was the school's resident nerdy kid, an expert in all things Dungeons & Dragons, and often bored us with passionate Marvel versus DC character debates. "Hey, how come Jimmy didn't come over tonight?" Rob said, his mouth full of Doritos. Rob was my closest friend and frequently spent his nights at my house. His family had immigrated from Mexico, which often led to jokes about his legal status in the country. I also had a crush on his older sister, Maria, which he resented and teased me about, adding a touch of playful rivalry to our friendship.
He went to the Outer Banks with his dad. I think his grandfather died and left them a house or something, I said, leaning against the treehouse wall. The soft glow of the moon filtered through the leaves, casting intricate patterns on the floor. I bet he's loaded now. Just think of all the poontang he'll get with a beach house. Jake chimed in, his voice filled with mischievous excitement. Dude, Jimmy's gay, I said, rolling my eyes at his comment. Well, think about all the wieners he'll get then, he retorted, eliciting a round of laughter from us. The night had been a whirlwind of VHS horror movies, pizza, and thought-provoking conversations, primarily centered around boobs. I glanced at my wrist. My digital watch read 11:59 p.m. Time held no real value in our little sanctuary. Tomorrow would consist of sleeping in, Nerf gun battles, more horror movies, and another sleepover. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and adventure that surrounded us. Summer was truly awesome, and our treehouse was the epicenter of our endless escapades. However, our peaceful night was shattered when an unsettling, guttural voice came from below. "Hello, boys. Mind coming down from that treehouse?" We exchanged bewildered glances as we stood at the treehouse window, aiming our flashlights downward toward the voice. A figure emerged from the shadows, his features obscured by the dark, but the putrid stench of decay clung to the air. Who's there?" I stammered. The figure advanced, triggering a motion light in my backyard, bathing it in eerie illumination. In the dim glow, a tall, emaciated man with pallid, mottled skin stood silhouetted, his body covered in a yellowish, putrid slime that glistened under the feeble light. He moved with an unnatural, jerky motion, every step sending ripples across his slimy, decrepit flesh. Each squishy footfall echoed with an unsettling, wet noise. Reacting to the ominous intrusion, Jake rushed to the hole in the treehouse floor, swiftly retrieving the rope ladder that dangled below, our hearts pounding as we exchanged alarmed glances. Looking up at us, the man smiled, revealing rows of rotting teeth. His voice, chilling and malevolent, cut through the night air. "Hello, boys. Come on down, so I can eat you." Panic gripped us, and our screams for help were swallowed by the darkness. The rotted man cackled, a wet, croaking sound revealing a horrifying secret. His chest opened like gills on a fish, exposing bone and sinew beneath the mottled skin, a sight that left us horrified. "You're wasting your breath," the rotted man rasped. "Whole towns are being devoured as we speak." His bony finger pointed into the abyss, and to our horror, we realized he was right. Other figures, equally morbid and decomposed, lurched into view, their distorted forms stumbling and groaning in the moonlit street. My thoughts instantly went to my parents inside. "Yup, them too, Tommy." The rotted man smiled, revealing a mouth full of rotting, jagged teeth. My heart sank at this revelation, my anger rising as I yelled down to the rotted man, desperate for a glimmer of hope. "You're lying!" The rotted man feigned injury with a step back, bringing his hands over his dead heart. "Oh no, I would never lie to you, Tommy. Your parents were nice and juicy. The best part is there's some leftovers between the couch cushions," he said with a phlegm-laden laugh. With a trembling voice, Rob shouted, "What do you want from us?" The rotted man chuckled. "I want you three. You're my dinner, but you get to wait. I enjoy watching you squirm." Then, with a slime-thick grin, he walked over to the neighbor's backyard, disappearing into the night. "Maybe he's leaving," Jake whispered. Rob, his face half shrouded in the flickering glow of the flashlight, spoke with a hint of unease. "Or maybe he's just waiting in the dark for us to come down." My cheeks were wet,
tears glistening in the faint light as I frantically peered out and through the back window of my house. I yearned for any sign that my parents were safe, locked securely inside. Then, the motion light clicked off, plunging us back into the obscurity, crickets chirping resonating with the nocturnal stillness. Rob's voice broke through the tension, the words barely above a whisper. "Tommy, don't listen to him. We don't know anything. He could be lying to get us to come down." Jake, his own voice trembling, added with a note of skepticism, "This whole thing could be an illusion or something. I mean, think about it. If the whole town was being eaten, wouldn't we hear screams and explosions?" I joined in, my voice wavering with fear. "If that's the case, what is he?" Jake offered a chilling possibility. "Maybe he's like a lich or something." Rob, raising his voice a notch, questioned, "What's a lich?" Jake thought for a second before replying. "It's like a powerful wizard that becomes undead to cheat death. They can also create zombies and stuff to do their bidding." "That's fucking stupid," Rob said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, you have a better idea?" "Maybe it's a chemical spill, like in that movie Return of the Living Dead," Rob said. Jake waved his hand dismissively towards Rob. "No way, that's a movie." I leaned forward, peering out the treehouse window. The darkness of the backyard was shattered as the motion light clicked back on, revealing the rotted man dragging a trampoline behind him, his hideous appearance a stark contrast to the serene backdrop of the suburban night. "Shit," I said, gaining Rob's and Jake's attention. The treehouse seemed to tremble as the rotted man wrestled with the trampoline directly below us, its rusty springs creaking and groaning as the frame scraped the bark of the tree. The night air grew heavy with dread as he scaled the tree with a predatory determination, stopping once he was in the center of the jumping mat. My heart pounded as the man leapt up from the trampoline, coming perilously close to the treehouse. The rotted man bounced again, his skeletal limbs flailing in the air as his fingertips grazed the entrance opening. "I'll eat you up, boys, piece by piece. You can't stay up there forever," he taunted. We clung to the treehouse, our sanctuary in a world overrun by the dead. The night felt interminable, each of the rotted man's leaps and taunts intensifying our terror. "I'm going to suck the marrow from your bones, boys!" he bellowed as he took another daring leap, this time scraping the bottom of the treehouse with his hand. Suddenly, a second decaying figure approached the trampoline, smaller but equally horrifying, its face a ghastly, skinless void. It wore tattered jeans and a coat soaked in dried blood. The faceless creature hoisted itself onto the trampoline, halting the rotted man's relentless jumping. The enraged rotted man lifted his right foot high before stomping down onto the creature's head. The force caused the creature's skull to explode in a gruesome shower of bone fragments and black sludge. "Mine!" the rotted man snarled as the now headless creature fell to the ground. Jake urgently pulled me and Rob away from the window and whispered, "I think I have a plan, but you guys won't like it." Confusion and fear swirled within me, and I hesitantly asked, "What do you mean?" "We used the branch above the treehouse to climb over and drop down onto your roof. Then we can climb into your second-floor window and call the police." "That's a terrible idea. The branch is 10 feet over my roof, and there's no way it'll hold us all." Rob, displaying newfound determination, interjected, "I'll do it." "Are you crazy? What about the drop to the roof?" I said, stepping in between him and Jake. "I got it, Tommy." "Wait." In a swift motion, I retrieved my hunting knife and scabbard from beneath the mattress on the floor. "Take this," I said, offering the knife to Rob, who promptly fastened it to his belt. Rob's determination left no room for doubt as he climbed out of the window and onto the roof of the treehouse. We listened to his footsteps across the rafters, carrying the weight of our hopes and fears. He neared the branch, rustling leaves and creaking wood marking his progress. Then, Rob came into view, inching over the narrow branch with a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. Beneath, the rotted man paused in his pursuits and looked up, his menacing gaze fixed on Rob's ascent. The branch groaned under his weight, curving downwards as he inched closer to the roof. We watched in breathless suspense as he cleared the final inches, perfectly balanced over the roof. Beads of sweat trickled down his face, fear etched in every line of his expression. Slowly, Rob lowered himself down the branch until he came to a dead hang. "It's too high!" Rob's voice quivered as he confronted the daunting drop to the roof below. "Climb back up!" Jake urged. Rob looked back at the branch, attempting to pull himself up, arms straining against his own weight. His chin cleared the branch, but his strength waned, and he descended back to a precarious hang. "Fuck!" Rob cried out, struggling to pull himself back up, but the ordeal was too much for his fatigued arms. With one last glance at us, his eyes closed, and he let go, falling to the roof below with a resounding thud and sliding perilously close to the edge before catching himself. "Rob, are you okay?" I yelled. Rob laid on the roof for a moment, catching his breath. "I skinned my hands and knees." Relief flooded over me as Rob regained his footing. "Can you make it to the window?" Jake shouted down to him. "Hold your horses, dude. That shit hurt." Despite the tension and the imminent threat that still lingered, I couldn't help but laugh, a moment of triumph breaking through the fear. "You're the man!" I cheered as Rob crawled up to the window. Rob held his middle finger in the air and yelled back, "Fuck you, Tommy!" eliciting a laugh from me. Beneath the ominous moonlight, I glanced down to the yard below, my moment of triumph quickly eroding as I searched for the rotted man and his ghastly companions. Rob, his face drained of color, flung the window screen to the ground, unleashing a metallic clang that echoed in the silence. He pivoted back to the window, just as two mottled arms burst forth, grabbing him with a vice-like grip. A terrified scream erupted from his lips as the potent arms pulled him relentlessly against the window frame. My voice quivered, tears streaming down my face as I cried out, "Rob, get out of there!" Helplessness clawed at me as I watched Rob brace himself against the windowsill, one hand reaching for the hunting knife fastened to his belt. The rotted man emerged from the window, his blackened teeth opening wide just before biting into Rob's cheek with perverse glee. Rob recoiled from the pain, thrashing wildly to free himself. A crimson gush of bright blood sprayed from his face as the rotted man tore away, ripping muscle and flesh. I crumpled to my knees, heart-wrenching sobs convulsing my body as I heard Rob's agonized cries as he was dragged through the window. The torment and helplessness of the situation were unbearable, and tears blurred my vision. Jake looked down to the backyard, seeing an opportunity for escape. His freckled face etched with remorse, he grabbed my arm and urged me into action. "We've got to go, now!" Frozen in a cocoon of fear and grief, I pushed Jake's arm away and rolled onto my side. The images of Rob's gruesome end replayed mercilessly in my mind, trapping me in a vortex of anguish. Jake retreated to the treehouse entrance and flung the rope ladder to the ground. His somber gaze met mine once more, and his freckled face wore the burden of responsibility. "I'm sorry, Tommy. It's our only chance. I promise I'll bring back help." As Jake descended into the darkness, I was seized by an overpowering sense of shame. My heart hammered with a mix of emotions, each one fueling my inner turmoil. The terror of being left alone in the encroaching darkness gripped me, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the sanctuary of the treehouse. Minutes passed, and the echo of Jake's descent into the unknown filled my ears. Overcoming my fear, I crawled to the treehouse entrance, where Jake had disappeared into the blackness, and carefully pulled the rope ladder back up. I found some solace in the familiarity of the treehouse's confines, the wooden planks holding within their grain the memories of countless adventures. The sounds of crickets and the gentle summer breeze embraced me, their whispered lullaby soothing my troubled mind. My breathing grew steady, a semblance of calm gradually restoring my sense of self. Relief washed over me as the horrors of the night seemed to lose their grip in the wake of my dreams. I slipped into a vivid reverie, a sanctuary of happy memories where the weight of our current ordeal momentarily lifted. I dreamt of endless summer nights filled with pizza and video games. My mom as she tied her blonde hair in a ponytail just before a water gun battle. My father grilling burgers and hot dogs as Jake showed off his newest G.I. Joes. I thought of Rob's laughter, and lastly, of his older sister Maria as she swam at the pool park. Then, as the dream receded, I was awakened by the gentle chirping of birds. I rolled over to my side, feeling the comforting light of the morning sun on my face. The need to relieve myself pressed against me, urging me into action. Rubbing my eyes, I rose from the mattress and moved to the treehouse window. I yawned and stretched, the lingering traces of the dreams fading in the dawn's light. My eyes closed momentarily, basking in the sun's warmth, the sweet scent of honeysuckle and gardenia permeating the air. But the tranquility of the moment was shattered by a voice from below, a voice I had hoped to never hear again.
"Good morning, sleepyhead. I thought you'd never wake up."
My breath hitched, and I abruptly opened my eyes, peering down into the yard below. The rotted man sat in a folding chair, a bizarre semblance of normalcy as he bathed in the early morning sun. His face, smeared with dried, clotted blood, and his swollen belly were a reminder of the horrors that had unfolded. To his left sat Jake, his eyes milky white and drained of life, the frames of his broken glasses embedded deep into his cheeks. Jake's left arm, a tangle of exposed muscle and bone, testified to the brutality of his final moments. To the rotted man's right, Rob sat with a hunting knife protruding from his chest. Half of Rob's face had been devoured, revealing the skeletal remnants beneath, his left eye a vacant hollow. Rob and Jake stared up at me with vacant, soulless eyes, the intensity of their gaze cutting through my very being. "Come on down, Tommy," Rob whispered, a tooth breaking free from his mutilated mouth. "Yeah, Tommy, come down," Jake said as he shifted in his chair, prompting a vile brown fluid to ooze from his nose. The rotted man leaned forward, picking his teeth with Jake's pinky finger. "Hey, champ, things can go on just like they always have. You can have your friends and family back. I just need you to come down." Fear caused me to stumble from the treehouse window, escaping the ghastly view below. Backing against the cool wall of the treehouse, I closed my eyes to the reality of the terror outside. "He's not lying. Things can go back to normal." Rob's strained voice came from under the treehouse. Lowering myself to the floor, I crawled over to the entrance hole and peered down to see Rob and Jake looking up at me. You guys look terrible," I shouted down. Rob and Jake looked at each other, then back up to me with crooked smiles. "Does it hurt?" I asked. Jake shrugged. "A little, I guess, but I don't really remember it." "Are you guys still, yourselves?" "We're still us," Rob said, leaning his head to one side and exposing a torn artery. I took a deep breath and dropped the rope ladder. Jake reached out, taking it in his hand, steadying it for my climb down. Later that day, in this hot summer sun, Jake, Rob, and I sat in the treehouse. Rob flipped through the various magazines that lined the floor as Jake sat back, attempting to solve a Rubik's Cube with his remaining hand. Seeing my friends together as they moved about in the blood-stained treehouse, I smiled and thought about the rest of summer as a black fly landed on my forehead. The rotted man had been right. Everything was back as before. In some ways, it was even better. Tonight, we'll be taking a field trip to the next town, and I'm really looking forward to making more friends. We've just finished Cometh the Rotted Man by Shane H. Sellers. And now, also from Shane H. Sellers, I present House of the Rat King. Prologue. The most intimate knowledge you'll get from a person is when you clean up after them. When you're cleaning, you see a side of that person that many never do. You see their trash, their stains, their unwashed dishes, their reckless behavior, their filthy toilets, their disregard for pet care, their laziness, their ignorance, their financial problems, their insecurities, their hygiene habits, their sex life, their family, and lastly, their humanity, or lack of it. Cleaning anything involves making something else dirty, but anything can get dirty without something else getting clean. Lawrence J. Peter. 1. We sat parked outside as rain lashed against the van's windshield, each drop a tiny hammer striking with the storm's fury. Through the blurry glass, the decrepit Victorian wasn't much to look at, with its peeling paint and rotted wood siding. Large, ornate iron bars crisscrossed the windows on the first and second floors. The yard was a mix of overgrown weeds and trash that complemented the dilapidated exterior. A large steel dumpster sat only feet away from the front porch.
Another day, another shithole,
Jesse said from the back of the van. Randall took a sip of coffee, his voice tinged with frustration.
I go to college and this is where I'm at? Fuck me, bro.
I shifted behind the steering wheel, taking out the work order form.
The house belonged to a widower who died about 3 weeks ago. Family took one look inside and said, fuck this place. Most of the house is infested with German cockroaches and other vermin, so keep your suit and respirator on. If you find anything of value, including money, let me know. Don't just start pocketing shit.
If I find something, that shit's going towards my loans, Randall scoffed. You find something, you turn it in, and we label it. Family gets 30 days to pick it up. Then it's a three-way split, I said, looking directly at Randall.
What about the storm?
Jesse interrupted, concern creeping into his voice as he glanced at the heavy rain.
We're working inside and the porch is covered. Should be no problem to move stuff out and throw it in the dumpster,
I replied, opening the van door, trying to project confidence despite my own apprehensions. Outside, the rain came down steadily as dark clouds churned in the sky. The low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, followed by bright flashes of lightning. We quickly ran through the yard, up the porch, and then to the front entrance. Once at the front door, I retrieved a partially soaked envelope from my pocket containing the key to the residence. Securing my respirator over my face, I proceeded to unlock the front door. Inside, the house was overflowing with rubbish. Piles of soiled clothes lined the foyer, while a moldy couch blocked the stairs. In the main den, stacks of old magazines reached the ceiling, the floor hidden by mounds of trash. Jesse switched on his flashlight, illuminating a cluster of roaches nesting in the transom above the entrance.
Jesus,
Randall said, pushing past an old wicker basket filled with dirty children's toys.
Let's start here and cut a path to the den,
I said, holding the front door open. Jesse picked up a large, leaking trash bag, exposing a puddle of black sludge underneath. With one quick motion, he slung the bag to the front porch and turned back to collect a stack of waterlogged books. For a few minutes, we worked, tossing out the junk and creating a path that allowed me to advance deeper into the house. Behind me, Randall groaned as he lifted a pair of shoes caked in dried rat urine. With a little more navigation through the heaps of garbage, I was able to enter the den, where a large Zenith TV sat on a cabinet surrounded by a collection of empty Campbell soup cans with plastic utensils sticking out of them. There was a small, trodden path leading to what I presumed to be the kitchen. On the far wall was a framed picture of an old man dressed in ritualistic robes and a large golden necklace. The attire reminded me of something a Masonic member might wear, with gold-embroidered rats on the sleeves of the jacket. The man in the picture seemed to be genuinely happy, a stark contrast to the squalor of the home. I paused in mid-step, my ears perking up to the loud, muffled words coming from upstairs. It sounded like Jesse and Randall were arguing. The voices grew more intense the longer I listened. It wasn't uncommon for the two to bicker, but I never heard them argue with this intensity. With one last look at the den, I turned and made my way back to the foyer. Randall and Jesse, now on the second floor, prompted me to climb the stairs until I was in front of a bedroom where they both stood. Adjacent to the bedroom was a junk-filled hallway with rooms on each end. Both Randall and Jesse had their respirators pulled off and seemed to be pacing back and forth.
"Fuck, bro! I didn't sign up for this shit!"
Randall shouted, panic lacing his voice. Jesse leaned in the doorway, his eyes wild with panic, causing me to hesitate before entering the bedroom. In the center, a small child's mummified body sat on a chair. The body was wrapped in leather straps, its mouth gagged with a red plastic ball. Beneath the chair, 2 blocks of wood with rusty nails pierced the child's shriveled feet. The room itself was painted in a dull pastel pink color, strange symbols decorating the walls and ceiling. A tripod and camcorder stood in the opposite corner with a lazy boy recliner. Beside the recliner, a waste can overflowed with discolored Kleenexes and a large leather flail with dried blood on the tips. My stomach lurched at the sight, spurring me to remove my mask to avoid throwing up. A sickening feeling crawled up into my chest. I just needed to breathe, needed to get outside. The oily musk of the room filled my nostrils.
"Out, now!"
I shouted, motioning for the two to join me. Randall looked at me, his face slick with sweat.
"I'm calling the cops, bro."
I took Jesse by the arm, leading him out into the hallway. We were only feet away from the steps when my left foot sank down into the floor. Pausing, I inspected the spot where my foot was now a good 3 inches into the floor. Lifting my foot up, a loud mechanical clank echoed in the hallway. Randall, who was already on the top step, jerked back, grabbing the stair railing.
"What the fuck, bro?"
Randall shouted, his voice high-pitched with fear. Confused, I let go of Jesse, moving between Randall and the staircase. To my amazement, the stairs had dropped against the wall on hinges through a mechanical support release. Now, I was looking at the basement below, the gap extending the full length of the staircase, the drop being at least 30 feet down to the bottom, where large, sharpened rebar spikes pointed up from the floor. "It's a trap," I said, turning to meet Jesse and Randall.
"What do you mean it's a trap?"
Jesse stammered. I walked back to the spot where I had stepped earlier, brushing the refuse away to reveal a large metal plate. "This must be a pressure plate," I said, pointing down. A look of confusion stretched over Randall's face as he slowly got up to his feet.
"You mean this whole place is rigged up like some twisted version of Home Alone?"
Randall said, his eyes searching mine for some kind of reassurance. "I don't know. It could be just the one trap," I said, trying to calm the situation and myself.
"Anybody got their phone?"
Jesse asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I reached for my pockets instinctively, remembering I left my phone inside the van.
"In the van,"
I replied. Randall put his hand up to his forehead, letting out a loud gasp of air.
"Me too." "Fuck, no one has a phone,"
Jesse said. I stepped back to the top of the staircase. A stack of garbage bags kept the front door open. Outside, Thunder rumbled as the storm grew closer. I studied the railing, trying to gauge if I could straddle it and slide down. Leaning out, I tested my weight on the rail, the wood protesting with a loud crack. "Stairs are off limits," I said, turning back to Jesse and Randall. "Windows?" Jesse suggested, his voice tinged with a flicker of hope. "Most of them had bars on the outside, but we could try," Randall replied, though he sounded uncertain. "I think it's best we wait things out. This place might have other traps," I said, trying to sound confident even though doubt gnawed at me. "Bro, it's Friday. That means the office closes at 4:30 and no one will be back till Monday morning," Randall retorted, panic rising in his voice. Jesse held his finger up, motioning for us to stop talking. "I got an idea. If we can find the attic access, I might be able to get through the window there." "I don't know, Jesse. Sounds pretty risky," I replied. "Risky? This whole place could be a death trap. You think we'll be safe if we stay put?" Jesse countered, determination hardening his features. Randall, clearly frustrated by the circumstance, threw his respirator on the floor, kicking it against the wall. Jesse reached out to calm him, but Randall brushed his hand away. "Fuck this, bro," Randall said as he started down the hallway to a closed door at the end. "Hold up, man," I said, following behind him. Randall grabbed the doorknob tightly, looking back at me with an expression of anger. "I ain't waiting in this shithole to be rescued," Randall said, turning the knob and opening the door. Blam! A deafening explosion erupted from the room, sending shards of wood and plaster flying. I held my hands up to my face, my ears still ringing from the blast, dust particles floating in the open air. Then came the screaming. Randall crashed against the wall, clutching his right arm below the wrist. Muscle and bone splintered out, resembling a morbid flower. Bright red blood spurted forth as a look of sheer terror washed across his face. Jesse pushed me down, running over towards Randall and wrapping his belt around the arm. Randall's face lit up with pain as Jesse cinched the belt down, torquing it with a piece of wood he picked up from the floor. Yelling, lots of yelling between the two of them. Randall screaming, while Jesse fought with him to stop the bleeding. Still in shock, I touched my face, feeling a wet bump. I pressed it with my index finger until a small brass BB fell to the floor. I had been shot, or at least caught one of the pellets from the initial blast. In the doorway, an 8-inch hole was blown right below the doorknob. "Darren! Wake the fuck up, Darren! I need your help!" Jesse shouted. Randall's eyes shifted to the ceiling, his face turning pale as Jesse managed to clamp the belt around his arm. "We gotta get him some help, now," Jesse said, looking at me. Still half dazed, I stood balancing against the blood-splattered wall. Jesse moved in front of me, carefully opening the door where Randall had been standing earlier. In the front of the room, duct-taped to a table, was a shotgun pointed towards the entrance. Fishing line ran up to a series of pulleys that connected to an eye bolt fastened to the door. "Holy shit," Jesse exclaimed, moving deeper into the room. A copper bed frame with stained pillows and a blanket rested in the corner. My eyes adjusted to the dim light from the outside window, coming to rest on the attic access above. "There," I said, pointing to the ceiling. Jesse looked up, giving a nod of confirmation. "I'll give you a boost," I said, moving under the access and cupping my hands. Jesse steadied himself on my shoulder, stepping into my hand as I lifted him upward. He snatched the cord with ease, landing back on his feet. With a tug, he pulled the access open, a small wooden ladder unfolding. "I'm going up. Make sure that tourniquet stays on," Jesse said, taking hold of the ladder. "Be careful up there," I replied, steadying the ladder as he ascended the steps. Jesse took one more look at me, disappearing into the darkness of the attic. I sat at the foot of the ladder, listening as he methodically moved across the beams. Moving back to the hallway, Randall sat slouched over, his eyes drowsy from blood loss. He was mumbling something incoherent, his face now gaunt, lips blue. I brushed the hair from his eyes, taking a few seconds to check his body for additional wounds. 2. "Hang in there, Randall. Jesse's gonna get help," I said. As if on cue, a groan came from the ceiling above. Jesse was right on top of us, moving closer to the front of the house. This had to work. He had to get out. "Darren, I can see the attic window." Jesse's muffled voice came from the ceiling. "Great! How far are you from it?" I yelled back, pausing to listen. Thunder boomed outside as rain came down in torrents. "I'm almost there," Jesse shouted, the rain blocking out his words. I stood, looking at the ceiling, straining my ears to make out what he was saying. A faint squeak came from down the hall, inside the child's room. I leaned over the railing, trying to get a closer look, the door blocking my field of vision. Then, something crawled into the entranceway, something low to the ground with matted fur. A dog, perhaps, but the movements were off, the body resembling more of a person than an animal. It skittered in and out of view from behind the door, eliciting a deep, wet cough. Could it be a person, still trapped in here like us? Maybe a victim who had been surviving since the death of the homeowner? Cautiously, I tiptoed down the hall, careful to keep my distance. Above me, the ceiling whined as Jesse balanced between the attic beams. I drew closer to the room, the rain outside masking my steps. I could see the child's body in the far left corner of the room, but the figure was gone. I took another step, my upper body now inside the room, my hip anchored against the frame. My eyes shifted, searching the recesses of the room until settling on an opened hatch hidden behind the recliner. Slowly, I approached, seeing a crawl space that tunneled under the floor. Not taking any chances, I quietly shut the trap door, pushing the recliner on top of it. "I'm at the window!" Jesse shouted from above. Before I could respond, a deep scratching sound came from behind the wall in front of me. The sound shifted with weight, causing specks of dust to float through the room. Whatever it was now climbing up towards the attic. "Jesse, something's climbing towards you!" I yelled. More sounds from above, now in the ceiling. Weight shifting on the wooden beams, wet coughing, the drone of heavy rain. Then, a scream reverberated through the house. It was Jesse struggling, trying to fend off whatever was up there with him. The plaster in the ceiling buckled, then cracked as Jesse's work boot punched through. He kicked wildly in the air, trying to free himself, the ceiling coming apart until he fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Jesse lay motionless, covered in insulation and gypsum. I stooped down, trying to check him for injuries, when two pink, fleshy hands emerged from the hole. The figure moved closer into the light, its face matted with damp fur, eyes black as coal, and whiskers that brushed against the boards of the attic. Its mouth opened, exposing 4 jagged incisors, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. A thick necklace of gold hung around its neck. I stared in disbelief at what I was seeing. It was a rat, or at least something akin to a rat. Behind its black eyes exuded an ancient, menacing intelligence. The creature seemed to be plotting something as it glared back at me. Then, with a quick jerk, it backed away out of my sight. "Jesse, wake up! We gotta move!" I said, shaking his chest. The wall in front of me vibrated. The creature was now climbing back down to the crawl space. "Wake up!" I pleaded, crawling from under the hardwood floors. "Jesse, wake up!" I shouted, slapping him across the face. Jesse's eyes fluttered open, staring back at me with a look of confusion. The recliner bumped a few inches into the air as the creature tried to open the hatch. Jesse sat up, the realization of where and what was happening flooding back to him. He turned to me, taking my hand as I lifted him to his feet.
The recliner bounced again, this time with enough force to send it toppling over. We ran from the room, the trap door flying open just as we closed the door behind us. Jesse stumbled to the railing as I held the doorknob tightly in my hand. "What the fuck was that?" Jesse shouted. Just then, the door pulled forward with immense strength. I struggled to keep the door closed as Jesse frantically looked around, scooping up a broken chair leg. My hands were losing grip on the knob, beads of sweat collecting on my forehead. "I can't hold it much longer!" I shouted. Jesse took hold of my shoulder, yanking me clear of the doorway and sending me falling into the hallway. The door ripped open, the creature scrambling on all fours into the hallway. Jesse swung the chair leg with all his might, the wood splintering against the rat's skull. Despite the blow, the rat lunged forward, snapping its jagged teeth inches from Jesse's face. To my left, a broom lay partially covered by a cardboard pizza box. Taking the handle into both of my hands, I forced it down, snapping it across my knee. I held the broken pieces up, choosing to keep the one with the sharpest point. Jesse was now being pushed closer to the front steps, his shouting becoming more desperate. I steadied my breathing, rushing forward and driving the broom handle into the side of the rat. At the same time, Jesse sidestepped, sending the creature forward using its own momentum and plummeting off the staircase. A sickening crash came from below as the rat hit the basement floor, two of the sharpened rebar puncturing its chest. We both looked below as the creature writhed in agony, its solid black eyes bulging with pain. Viscous blood oozed from its open mouth. "What the fuck was that?" Jesse exclaimed. Without answering, a stream of hot bile and morning breakfast spewed outward. I retched hard until my side hurt. Looking away from the creature, the glint of gold caught my attention as the necklace it had worn dangled on the railing. I reached out, taking it in my hand, feeling the solid weight of the jewelry. If this was real, it had to be worth a small fortune, I thought, draping the necklace over my head. Jesse moved back over to Randall, inspecting his condition. Do you think we can still get out from the attic?" I asked, wiping the vomit from my mouth. "I think so. I was able to get the window open." "What about him?" I said, looking at Randall. Randall's glazed eyes looked back at me, giving me a thumbs up with his remaining hand. "He's good for now, but we need to make sure he doesn't go into shock. Grab a few of those pillows from the other room so we can prop his legs up," Jesse said. I nodded, making my way back to the room with the attic access. There, I began stripping the pillows off the copper bed frame when a small cardboard box fell onto the blanket. I grabbed the box, reading the label. Winchester 12-gauge double-aught buckshot. 4 shells remained inside, but I had no use for them. I had to get back to Jesse. Walking back into the hallway, we lowered Randall onto his back, elevating his legs with the pillows. This seemed to bring some color back into his face as the blood flowed back down towards his head. Jesse wedged the extra pillow between Randall and the wall, allowing us to raise the mangled limb. "Okay, this should do for now. We just gotta keep him awake," Jesse said. "I'll go this time. Makes more sense for you to stay here. You know more about this medical stuff than I do," I replied. "Eagle Scout," Jesse said with a smile. "What? You're an Eagle Scout? You've got to be shitting me," I laughed. Jesse shook his head in affirmation. "With all the badges, too." Our conversation was suddenly cut short by an ear-piercing shriek that came from the basement. I stood, looking from atop the stairs as the rat shrieked once more. It must be crying out in pain, I thought. But then another thought made me shudder. What if it was screaming for help? "Jesse, I don't think that was the only one," I said. "What?" Jesse replied, standing back up. The house came alive with the sounds of scratching as things moved within the darkness. The wounded rat shrieked again, louder and more desperate. Sounds of hidden movement came from all around us. We gotta move Randall, I shouted. Jesse bent down, sticking his hands underneath Randall's arms to drag him. The pain caused Randall to jolt awake. Bro, what's going on? What the fuck? Randall said, pointing towards the child's room. A black rat the size of a St. Bernard crawled into view. Behind it, another dropped from the hole where Jesse fell. Fuck! We gotta move, now! I shouted as Jesse and I dragged Randall into the adjacent room. I slammed the door shut, barricading it with the table that the shotgun sat taped to. Looking through the blasted hole in the door, more rats congregated in the hallway. I reached into my pocket, retrieving my pocket knife, and began cutting the shotgun free. Grab those shells on the bed, I shouted to Jesse. Jesse looked around the room until he saw the box of shotgun shells. Hurrying over, he grabbed the box, putting them into my free hand. Nervously, I unlocked the lever, removing the spent shell and inserting another one into the chamber. Holding the stock up to my cheek, I pulled back the hammer, taking aim at the door. From the attic access, a dingy gray rat climbed down, its teeth glistening in the dim light as thick ropes of saliva dripped from its snarling mouth. I pointed, firing the shotgun. The stock kicked hard into my shoulder as the pellets ripped into the rat's body, causing it to fall from the ladder. Working the lever, I opened the chamber, pulling the spent shell out and reloading the gun. The door splintered as the rats pushed against it from the hallway. From above, the ceiling broke open, a brown rat bursting through the rafters, landing on top of Randall as he lay motionless on the floor. The beast dug its long teeth into his neck, blood spewing from Randall's mouth. Aiming the shotgun at the rat, I pulled the trigger, sending it flying across the room and slamming into the wall. Jesse rushed over to Randall as the door broke loose from the frame. Jesse, get back! I shouted, loading the shotgun. The table pushed free from the door, and the rats rushed in like a tidal wave of sharp teeth and mangy fur. In an instant, they were on Jesse, pulling him in all directions as he fought to free himself. I couldn't get a clear shot as they pulled him back into the hall, biting and tearing at his body. I watched in horror as several of the rats began to chew down his right arm until it tore free in a gush of bright red gore. Jesse's face was locked in silent terror as he vanished within the ranks of the ravenous pack. Mortified by the brutality, I looked away to the window. My only hope of escape was getting past the bars. I smashed the glass out using the butt of the gun and then proceeded to kick at the bars using all my weight. Behind me, the rats were still feasting on Jesse, but at any moment their attention would shift back to me. I kicked again and again, the bars starting to give way as rain and wind whipped through the broken window, mingling with stale decay of the house. Then, an angry grunting came from behind me. I slowly turned, my blood running cold, as my eyes looked up to a rat that towered over me in the center of the room. It stood on its back legs akin to a grizzly bear, dark, wet fur shining in the light from the window. On its chest was a thick golden necklace like the other, only bigger. My legs grew heavy at the sight of the enormous creature. Its putrid smell wafted in the humid air, causing me to back away until my back pressed against the bars of the window. I lifted the shotgun just as the creature pounced forward, knocking me to the floor. I gasped for air, the weight of the rat pressing down on top of me. A searing hot pain bellowed up from my left leg as the rat sunk its teeth deep into my flesh. My muscles seized with pain as I was lifted into the air and slammed to the floor. For a moment, I was outside my body, watching as the giant rat continued its savage attack. Randall's lifeless eyes stared back at me from the corner of the room. My right hand still held the shotgun as the rat continued to bite into my leg. It would be so simple to watch the end of my life play out here. So simple to allow the warmth of death to wash away the fear. To return meant I would have to endure pain. More pain than I had ever experienced. Then there was anger, deep inside me, It came bursting forth in waves of hate. These fucking rats had killed Randall and Jesse, and now they were killing me. I thought about the child that had endured so much suffering and the sick bastard that had created this hellhole. Rage flowed through me like gasoline to fire, my heart pumping pure adrenaline, and I was back in my body. The weight of the rat was still unbelievable, but I was able to turn my hips. The action seemed to anger the rat as it released me and started moving towards my face. I pressed my injured leg into its belly, pushing with all my strength until my chest and arms were free. The rat opened its mouth as it glared back at me with unbridled malice, just as I shoved the barrel of the shotgun into its maw. "Fuck you!" I said, pulling the trigger and exploding the rat's head in a geyser of blood and brains that washed over me. The beast went limp, falling atop of me and pinning my legs to the floor. The other rats seemed to back up, their noses sniffing the air. They could smell the death of their alpha, and it struck fear into them. They began to retreat down the hall as I freed myself. I reached down, taking the necklace from the rat and putting it around my neck. Some part of me had changed, a darkness that had passed from the homeowner to the rats, and now to me. A supernatural feeling of dominance, and, at the center, the colony that now hid in the basement of the home. I was the alpha now, and the rats would follow me anywhere. That is, until I died, or they found something stronger. Epilogue. It's been 6 months since the hellish encounter, and not a day goes by I don't think of Randall and Jesse. For the most part, I've healed up, physically, but the bite on my leg led to a nasty infection that kept me in the hospital for a month. Did I mention I fell out the window after breaking the bars free? I guess the blood loss made me pass out in mid-climb. It's a good thing I didn't break anything serious. I laid in the mud and rain for what seemed like hours. It's a wonder I didn't drown. Lucky for me, a passing motorist decided to pull over and render first aid. When the authorities asked me about what happened, I told them everything, which went as best as you might think a story about giant rats might go. The house has since been razed by the state. Police and rescue crew found an additional 10 bodies inside the house, making the late owner a prolific serial killer. The media shitstorm that followed was something unseen since Ted Bundy defended himself in court. I must admit, some of the headlines, like Death House and The Victorian Crypt on Mason, were catchy, but I could never read the articles. Why would I need to? I mean, I survived it. My necklaces proved to be too tempting, disappearing on my arrival at the hospital. It would seem that a nurse, who was also a budding rapper, needed some bling for an upcoming video. It's too bad that a few days later I found the necklaces on my pillow, with a bloody ear. The colony is always eager to provide me with such gifts. I move around a lot these days, never staying in one place for more than a week. I can feel the colony wanting to nest, and pretty soon I'll have to find a place that will accommodate that desire. A safe place, where it's warm and there's plenty of fresh meat to feed on. You've just heard House of the Rat King by Shane H. Sellers. Shane Sellers is not just an avid writer. He is a maestro of the macabre, specializing in tales of the wicked and sinister that stalk in the shadows of the mind. As the imaginative force behind the Carrion Creature Feature YouTube channel, Shane breathes life into his dark tales, leaving audiences stunned with every blood-soaked word. Well, listeners, that wraps up our triple threat episode this week.
I'd like to express my thanks to Ryan Major and Shane H. Sellers for their stories this evening, as well as to Velik's books. Next week, we'll balance things out by having a single story written by a personal favorite of mine, J.R. Hamantashen. Be sure to tune in then, and until that time, friends, stay spooky. You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Tonight's episode was hosted and narrated by yours truly, Erik Peabody. Original music provided by Erik Peabody and Nikki McSorley. Finalization by Erik Peabody and Craig Groshek. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? Email it to us at natalie@chillingtalesfordarknights.com to have your work considered for future production. Seeing as how we're all living in a technological nightmare of our own devising, I'll ask you to follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on social media and upvote, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you're listening to this on YouTube. Not only will you have appeased the dark gods of cyberspace, but you'll be kept in the loop as we prepare more terrifying content. If you'd like access to uninterrupted horror, free of ads and these annoying bookend segments, might I recommend becoming a patron? You'll get access to hundreds of episodes of this show, as well as everything from the other programs in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights cabal. That means all of Otis Gyri's Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Drew Blood's Dark Tales, Paul J. McSorley's Fear from the Heartland, and more. It's a veritable smorgasbord of horrific delights. As for me personally, I'm on most social media as Viking Guitar or Viking Guitar Productions. I'm always on the lookout for new stories to narrate and new music projects to mix or master. If that's of interest to you, feel free to reach out and we can talk turkey. Also, I will be back next week with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. If darkness is what you're after, listener, your search is over. Yet, let it be known, you haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.